The night wind howled across the barren plains, carrying with it the sharp scent of cold earth and dying leaves. Under a skeletal oak, half buried in the frost-bitten soil, the old Mustang horse sagged against the coarse rope tied to the tree. His sides shuddered with each ragged breath. His once mighty frame, now gaunt and battered, bore the cruel marks of abandonment, a deep gash on his flank, ribs jutting against taut, dusty skin, eyes dull and hollow. The world around him blurred, sinking into darkness as the last light of the day bled out over the horizon. A few paces away, a figure stood, arms folded tightly across his chest, his face hardened by years of toil and loss. Samuel Carter, a farmer whose fields had long since withered and whose heart had followed close behind, spat into the dirt and stared at the horse as if willing it to simply disappear. In his mind, the creature was a symbol of every bitter failure he had tried and failed to outrun. Debt had swallowed his land. Time had worn down his body. And compassion, well, compassion had long been buried under layers of regret. "You ain't no use to nobody now," Samuel muttered under his breath, the words bitter on his tongue. The horse flicked one ear weakly, but did not lift his head. Samuel's hands, cracked and calloused, trembled slightly at his sides, but he set his jaw and turned away. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf's lonely cry pierced the night. Samuel paused, his boots sinking into the mud. For a long moment, he stood motionless, listening to the wild chorus rising from the woods. He knew what he was doing, knew what would come, and still he forced his feet forward, step after agonizing step, leaving the horse tethered to the gnarled oak, a sacrifice to the merciless wild. The truck door creaked as he yanked it open, the hinges protesting like everything else in his life. Samuel climbed in, slammed the door shut, and drove off without looking back, the engine growling low as he disappeared into the darkness. For a few long minutes, only silence and the soft whistle of the wind remained. The Mustang shifted slightly, hooves scraping weakly against the dirt. His breath formed small clouds in the cooling air. Above him, the first stars winked to life in the ink-black sky, indifferent to his suffering. Then a rustle. Not the sound of wolves, not yet, but something smaller, lighter, threading its way through the brush with cautious steps. A boy, no older than 14, emerged from the shadows, clutching a battered flashlight and a tattered backpack slung over one shoulder. His name was Eli Turner, though few in the nearby town bothered to remember it. He was the kind of kid who moved through life like smoke, thin, unnoticed, a ghost passing by the windows of others' lives. Eli crouched low, shining his light over the Mustang's battered frame. His stomach twisted at the sight of the wounds, the dullness in the animal's eyes. He'd followed the truck out of curiosity, seen Samuel drive off alone, and lingered long enough to realize something had been left behind, something Samuel had meant not to survive. "Hey there, boy," Eli whispered, voice trembling. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The Mustang shifted again, ears flicking back warily. He didn't have the strength to fight, but trust was not something easily given, not anymore. Still, some flicker of instinct kept him from lunging or pulling away. Perhaps he sensed something different in the boy's voice, a softness not yet crushed out by the world. Eli set his flashlight down and reached carefully into his backpack, pulling out a handful of dry, crumbling hay he'd stuffed inside earlier that morning. It wasn't much, but it was something. He held it out, hand steady despite the pounding of his heart. The horse's nostrils flared faintly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, the Mustang extended his neck and plucked a few strands from Eli's palm, chewing weakly. Relief flooded through Eli, though he knew this was only the first step of a much harder road. He wasn't strong enough to carry the horse, couldn't even untie the knot Samuel had tied, so tight it seemed welded to the bark. And night was falling fast, bringing with it all the things that hunted under the cloak of darkness. "Hang in there," he said, voice low and firm. "I'll be back. I promise." He backed away slowly, scooping up the flashlight and disappearing into the shadows once more, running toward the only place he knew might still hold a shred of hope. At the edge of town, the rusted metal sign for Miller's Veterinary Services swung lazily in the breeze. The building behind it was old, half forgotten like everything else in the dying town, but Eli knew Dr. Joanna Miller still worked there, even if most folks had given up on their animals and on each other. He pounded on the door with both fists, heart hammering in his chest. Lights flickered on inside, and after a few tense seconds, the door swung open. Dr. Miller stood framed in the light, hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing scrubs stained with the day's work. She squinted at him, frowning. "Eli Turner? What in heaven's name?" "Please, ma'am," he gasped, words spilling out. "There's a horse, out by the old oak. He's hurt bad. Tied up. Left for dead. I didn't know who else." Her eyes sharpened instantly. Without another word, she grabbed a heavy canvas bag from a hook by the door and motioned for him to lead the way. They drove out in her battered pickup, headlights carving a narrow tunnel through the darkness. Eli sat stiffly in the passenger seat, clutching the edge of the seat, so tightly his knuckles turned white. "You said he was tied up?" she asked, voice clipped, professional. "Yes, ma'am. Looked like he couldn't even stand right." Dr. Miller muttered something under her breath that Eli couldn't catch, but didn't ask her to repeat. Every second felt like a lifetime, each bump in the road jarring the knot of fear growing in his gut. When they reached the tree, Dr. Miller leapt out of the truck before it had fully stopped. She knelt beside the horse, hands moving quickly, checking the wound, the pulse, the glazed-over eyes. "He's bad off," she murmured, almost to herself. "Real bad, but not gone yet." Eli hovered nearby, desperate for instructions, for hope. Dr. Miller rose to her feet, jaw tight with determination. "We can't move him like this. Not without killing him. I'm going to give him something to ease the pain first. Then we'll see." She worked quickly, her movements sure and precise. Eli watched, feeling utterly helpless but unwilling to look away. The Mustang, despite everything, barely flinched when the needle slid under his skin. His body was simply too exhausted to protest. Minutes dragged by. The woods around them seemed to press closer, alive with unseen threats. Eli kept glancing toward the dark line of trees, half expecting glowing eyes to emerge at any moment. Finally, Dr. Miller straightened and gave a sharp nod. "Untie him, carefully. He needs to lie down. If he tries to fight, let him. Just keep talking to him." Eli scrambled to the rope, fingers fumbling at the knot. It took longer than he wanted, but finally, the rope fell away. He stepped back, heart in his throat. The Mustang staggered forward a step, then collapsed heavily onto his side. Dust billowed up around him, catching in the moonlight. Eli rushed to his side, kneeling by his head. "It's okay," he whispered, voice breaking. "You're not alone anymore. I promise." Dr. Miller approached with a blanket, covering the horse's battered body. She looked at Eli then, really looked at him, as if seeing not just a scrawny kid but something more, something stubborn and raw and achingly real. "You did good, kid," she said softly. For the first time that night, Eli let out a shaky breath, tears stinging the corners of his eyes. He scrubbed at his face with the sleeve of his jacket, embarrassed but too tired to care. Dr. Miller crouched beside him, her voice low but firm. "Saving him won't be easy. Might not even be possible. You sure you're up for that?" Eli didn't hesitate. His voice was steady when he answered. "I have to try." The night deepened around them, the stars burning cold and bright overhead. And somewhere in the darkness, fate, or something like it, held its breath. The morning after Elias made the agonizing decision to cut the Mustang loose, a bitter wind swept across the valley, rattling the dry grass and whispering through the leafless branches. He had returned to his small, crumbling farmhouse with the heavy knowledge of what he had done weighing on his chest. Each creak of the rotting floorboards under his boots seemed to echo the betrayal he felt he had committed against not just a creature, but against himself. Elias sat at his kitchen table, staring blankly at a cup of untouched coffee, its steam long since dissipated into the chill of the kitchen air. His rough, calloused hands trembled slightly, whether from the cold or the regret, he could not tell. Outside, the world carried on indifferently. A crow cawed sharply from the fence post, where Elias had once hung his hat after a long day's work, back when there was still enough life on the farm to make a day's labor meaningful. Now, the fields were barren, The barn half collapsed, and the well barely coughed up enough water to keep the old man alive. Memories of better days flashed unbidden behind his tired eyes. The farm bustling with cattle, horses neighing, the sound of laughter drifting across sun-drenched fields. Those days were gone, lost like so much dust on the wind. Unable to bear the suffocating weight of guilt, Elias pushed back his chair and stood. His knees cracked loudly in the silent room, a reminder that time had not spared him. Grabbing his worn-out coat and battered hat, he made his way outside, unsure of what he intended to do, but certain he could not sit idle any longer. His truck, an ancient Ford barely clinging to life, groaned in protest as he turned the ignition. The road to the ravine where he had left the Mustang was little more than a series of ruts and rocks, but Elias drove it by instinct, each jolt of the truck a punishment he welcomed. As he approached the ravine, dread tightened its icy grip around his heart. He feared what he might find, a broken, lifeless body picked apart by scavengers, or worse, the tracks of a desperate, suffering creature that he had condemned. Parking the truck at the edge of the clearing, Elias stepped out and scanned the area. For a long moment, he saw nothing but wind-blown dirt and the skeletal remains of long-dead bushes. Then he caught sight of a movement, a flash of dark mane against the pale earth. His breath caught in his throat. The Mustang was still there, collapsed on its side, its ribs stark against its heaving sides. It hadn't run. It hadn't even tried. It had simply lain down and waited for death. Something inside Elias shattered. Moving faster than his old body should have allowed, he stumbled down the incline toward the dying horse. As he drew near, the Mustang's dull, pain-filled eyes turned toward him. There was no anger there, no blame, only a deep, soul-wrenching sadness. Falling to his knees beside the animal, Elias reached out a trembling hand and placed it gently against the Mustang's lathered neck. "I'm sorry, boy," he whispered, voice breaking like dry twigs. "I should have been better. You didn't deserve this." The Mustang's ear flicked weakly at the sound of his voice, a faint, almost imperceptible acknowledgement. Elias knew he couldn't undo what he had done, but maybe, just maybe, he could still do something. Driven by a desperate need to atone, he stripped off his coat and draped it over the shivering horse. The thin fabric was woefully inadequate against the cold, but it was all he had. He couldn't move the horse on his own. He needed help, real help. But calling anyone meant swallowing his pride, exposing the full extent of his failure. For a moment, Elias hesitated, pride and shame battling within him. Then the Mustang let out a weak, broken whinny, and the decision was made. Elias sprinted back up the incline, his heart pounding wildly in his chest. In town, there was a young woman named Claire who ran a small animal rescue out of a dilapidated barn at the edge of the county line. She was the kind of stubborn, fierce-hearted soul who didn't ask questions when someone showed up with a wounded creature. She just acted. Elias had avoided her for years, embarrassed by the wreck his life had become, but now he had no choice. The drive to Claire's property was a blur of dust and frantic prayers. When he finally skidded into her yard, the woman came running, alarm written across her face. Claire was in her late 20s, her wild auburn hair tied back in a messy braid, jeans and boots caked in mud. Her hands were strong and capable, but it was her eyes, sharp, unyielding, and full of fire, that gave Elias hope. Without waiting for an explanation, Claire grabbed her emergency kit and a stack of heavy blankets and followed Elias back to the truck. He explained in short, breathless bursts during the drive, his voice cracking with emotion he no longer had the strength to hide. By the time they reached the ravine again, the sun was sinking fast, painting the sky in blood red and gold. Claire didn't waste a second. She knelt beside the Mustang, assessing its condition with quick, practiced movements. She muttered curses under her breath as she worked, furious at whoever had let the horse reach such a state, not knowing it had been Elias himself. "We'll need to move him. Now," she said sharply. "If he stays out here much longer, he's done." With Elias's help, Claire managed to slide a thick canvas sling under the Mustang's frail body. They rigged it to Elias's truck, fashioning a crude stretcher. It was a slow, agonizing process, filled with grunts of effort and whispered encouragements to the barely conscious animal. By the time they got the horse onto the flatbed, Elias's entire body ached, and Claire's face was streaked with dirt and sweat. Back at Claire's barn, they laid the Mustang on a thick bed of straw under the warmth of several heaters. Claire administered fluids, cleaned wounds, and checked for fractures. The Mustang flinched at first, but then seemed to recognize that this human, at least, meant no harm. Throughout the night, Elias sat by the stall, refusing to leave, his hand resting lightly on the horse's trembling flank. It was in those quiet, midnight hours that Elias began to speak, not to Claire, but to the horse. He told it about the farm, about his wife Anna, who had died 5 winters ago, about the slow, relentless erosion of everything he loved. He confessed his fear, his bitterness, his unbearable loneliness. The words poured out of him like a broken dam, flooding the small barn with sorrow and regret. Claire listened in silence from the doorway, her heart breaking for the old man, who had been too proud to ask for help and too stubborn to forgive himself. As dawn crept over the horizon, coloring the world in pale silver and soft blue, the Mustang lifted its head slightly and gave a low, rasping nicker. Elias straightened, a surge of hope warming him from the inside out. "He's a fighter," Claire said softly, stepping into the light. Elias looked up at her, his lined face raw with emotion. "Do you think he'll make it?" Claire hesitated, then nodded slowly. "He's got a chance, but it's going to take time. Patience. Care." Elias swallowed hard. "I'll do whatever it takes." Claire studied him for a long moment, then smiled, a small, weary smile, but genuine. "Good," she said, "because he's not the only one who needs saving." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Elias bowed his head, the truth of it settling into his bones. This wasn't just about rescuing the Mustang. It was about rescuing himself. The barn fell quiet again, save for the soft, steady breathing of the Mustang and the distant call of a rooster greeting the morning. Hope, fragile and uncertain, stirred for the first time in what felt like forever. Elias reached out and ran his hand gently along the Mustang's mane, the gesture filled with a promise he meant to keep. The journey ahead would be long and grueling, but for the first time in years, Elias didn't feel entirely alone, and neither did the Mustang. The days that followed blurred into a cycle of quiet determination. Elias barely left the small barn except to fetch feed, water, or the occasional cup of black coffee that Claire insisted he take. The Mustang, whom Claire began calling Valor, though Elias was slow to adopt the name, battled fever and weakness with a tenacity that humbled even the old farmer. There were nights when the horse's breathing grew shallow, when its muscles twitched with unseen pain, and Elias would sit by his side, whispering old cowboy songs into the stillness, songs that once filled wide, open plains with life. Claire visited twice a day, sometimes more when the weather dipped into biting cold. She never spoke much unless necessary, respecting the heavy, sacred bond forming between the broken man and the broken horse. But she was always there, a steady presence in the periphery, keeping a careful eye on both of them. Elias, once so proud he could scarcely accept a neighbor's handshake, found himself relying on her in ways he didn't dare name aloud. One afternoon, after nearly a week had passed, Elias noticed something different. Valor, who had mostly lain still save for the occasional shuddering attempt to rise, pushed himself halfway up on his forelegs. The effort left him trembling, sweat darkening the grayish-brown of his coat, but his ears flicked forward in stubborn defiance. Elias surged to his feet, heart hammering against his ribs. Without thinking, he grabbed a bridle that hung uselessly by the stall door, then caught himself and dropped it. Valor didn't need reins, he needed faith. Slowly, Elias moved closer, speaking softly. "Easy, boy. No need to rush it." Valor snorted weakly, a puff of hot air misting in the cold barn. Elias knelt beside him, letting the horse feel his presence, offering strength simply by being there. After several agonizing minutes, Valor collapsed back onto the straw, exhausted but alive, and Elias allowed himself the smallest smile. That night, Elias dreamed of open fields and wild horses, of Anna laughing as she rode alongside him, her hair a river of gold in the sun. When he woke, tears clung to his lashes, but the familiar weight of grief was lighter somehow, thinned by hope. 2 more days passed before Valor managed to stand fully. It was an ungainly, trembling affair, the Mustang's legs quivering under the unfamiliar burden of his own weight. Elias watched, holding his breath, ready to catch him though he knew it would be impossible. But Valor stayed upright, stubbornness gleaming in his dark eyes. Claire arrived midway through the small victory, grinning broadly when she saw the scene before her. "Would you look at that?" she said, leaning against the doorframe. "Tougher than a $2 steak, that one." Elias chuckled hoarsely, the sound foreign but welcome. "He's got more fight in him than I thought." Claire crossed the room and offered Valor a bucket of sweetened oats. The horse sniffed at it suspiciously before nibbling, each mouthful slow but deliberate. Watching them, Elias realized something fundamental had shifted. Valor wasn't just surviving anymore. He was choosing to live. Winter pressed down hard on the valley, blanketing the fields in snow and etching frost into the windows of the barn. Elias adapted, fortifying the stall with extra hay bales for insulation, rigging a makeshift heater from an old oil drum and a stubborn flame. Claire brought supplies when she could, vitamins, extra feed, even a thick winter blanket for Valor. She refused payment, waving away Elias's muttered offers with a shake of her head. "You'll pay me back just fine," she said once, tightening the blanket straps, "by getting better right alongside him." Elias didn't answer, but the words lodged deep inside him, stubborn and persistent as a burr. Weeks passed, and Valor grew stronger. His coat regained a healthy sheen, and the bones that had once jutted sharply beneath his skin softened with new muscle. His steps, tentative at first, grew confident. He trotted the length of the barn one morning, tossing his head with a spark of the wildness that had never fully left him. On that same morning, Claire broached a subject Elias had avoided. "He's going to need more room soon," she said, glancing around the cramped barn. "He's a Mustang, Elias. He needs space to run, to be what he is." Elias stiffened. The thought of letting Valor go, after everything they had fought through together, felt like carving out a piece of his own soul. But deep down, he knew she was right. He couldn't keep the horse caged forever, no matter how much he wanted to. "There's pasture land up north," Claire continued gently. "Open rescue range. They'll take him. He'll be free." The word free echoed hollowly in Elias's chest. Anna had once said that loving something truly meant setting it free, but Elias had never understood how love and loss could exist side by side. Until now. "I'll think on it," he said finally, voice rough. That night, he sat beside Valor in the dim barn, running a brush through the Mustang's coarse mane. The horse leaned into him, a solid, grounding presence. Elias spoke again, voice low and steady. "You deserve to run, boy. I know that. You ain't meant to be penned up, no more than the wind or the river." Valor turned his head slightly, nudging Elias's shoulder with a soft, warm breath. "But letting you go," Elias swallowed hard. "It's like losing her all over again." The silence that followed was thick, but somehow it didn't feel empty. It felt full, brimming with everything Elias had tried to bury for too long. Morning brought a decision. Elias called Claire, who wasted no time contacting the rescue range. They would come in 2 days to transport Valor north. The news settled over Elias like a second winter, cold and final. He spent those last 2 days with Valor, walking him around the snow-dusted fields, letting him taste the crisp air, feel the earth solid beneath his hooves. He spoke to him constantly, recounting stories of Anna, of the land they had loved, of the life that had been carved out of stubbornness and hope. Each word was a goodbye wrapped in gratitude. When the truck finally arrived, a heavy-duty trailer rumbling behind it, Elias felt an ache deep in his chest. Claire came too, standing quietly beside him as Valor was led toward the ramp. The Mustang paused at the base, looking back over his shoulder. For a heartbeat, man and horse simply stared at one another. In Valor's gaze, Elias saw no resentment, no fear, only trust, vast and unbroken. "Go on, boy," Elias said, his voice thick. "Go be what you were born to be." Valor let out a soft snort and climbed the ramp without hesitation. The trailer door shut with a hollow thud, and with it, A chapter of Elias's life closed. The truck pulled away, tires crunching over packed snow. Elias stood there long after it disappeared from sight, the cold biting into his skin. Claire laid a gentle hand on his shoulder, offering silent comfort. "You did right by him," she said finally. Elias nodded slowly. "He saved me just as much as I saved him." They walked back toward the farmhouse together, the world vast and empty around them. But for the first time in years, Elias didn't feel hollow. He felt ready. Ready to rebuild, to remember, to hope. Inside the house, the fire crackled warmly, throwing dancing light against the battered walls. Claire made coffee while Elias settled into his chair, the old wood groaning under his weight. They sipped in silence for a while, content in the shared understanding between them. "You ever think about fixing up this place?" Claire asked eventually, her voice light but purposeful. Elias looked around, taking in the peeling wallpaper, the sagging beams, the dust that had claimed every surface like a second skin. For so long, he had seen only decay. Now somehow he saw potential. "Maybe I do," he said, a slow smile tugging at his mouth. Claire grinned. "Good. You'll need a hand, of course." Elias chuckled, a sound full of life. "I reckon I might." The wind howled against the windows, but inside, warmth spread, not just from the fire, but from something deeper. Elias wasn't alone anymore. He wasn't lost. He had let go of the past, yes, but in doing so, he had found something even more precious, a future. And somewhere out there, racing across snowy fields under a boundless sky, a Mustang ran free, carrying a piece of his heart with him.